Dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for stories that will haunt your dreams and send shivers down your spine. Here at Tombstone Tales, we delve into the darkest corners of the internet, unearthing chilling stories of the supernatural, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying. From shadowy figures lurking in the night to sinister secrets buried deep in forgotten history, each episode is crafted to immerse you in a world of fear and fascination. Hit that subscribe button, join our community of thrill seekers, and embark on a journey where every whisper could be a warning and every shadow a threat. Are you ready to face your fears? Then let the story time begin. I had always been an avid hiker. Even from an early age, I was inclined to take off on my own to trek through the wilderness. I had an absolute fascination for the landscape and all the mysteries it held. So whenever the opportunity arose, I would pack up my car and head down into the heart of the southwest of Western Australia. This particular weekend, I decided to camp out instead of my normal day trips as I was determined to reach an area I had not previously explored on prior day trips. The day came, and I hit the road, excited by the thoughts of my new adventure. The drive down into the heart of the Kerry Forest took about 3 hours. The farther south I drove, the taller the trees became and the deeper the forest got. I had heard that there were a number of cave systems in the area I was going to hike through, so I decided to take a chance and leave my tent in the car and instead sleep in a cave. I put on my backpack, grabbed my walking stick, which would also be helpful if I came across snakes, and set out on a small trail heading towards a creek that was about 5 kilometers in. I had traveled this part of the hike a number of times and wanted to top up my water supplies before heading deeper into the forest, where I had heard there were a number of connecting cave systems. It was a beautiful day, not much wind, and the sun shone through the leaves, lighting up the undergrowth. The sounds of cicadas chirping and magpies singing their songs filled the air. By lunchtime, I had reached the creek, so I decided it was time to take a break and have something to eat. I found a nice spot, set down my backpack, and sat there for a while, taking in the scenery before eating my packed lunch. I had a sense of being watched every now and then, but I told myself I was being silly. Of course, I was being watched by all kinds of animals in the bush. After all, I was an intruder in a world that didn't belong to me. The water that flowed along the creek was crystal clear, so I filled up my water bottles, then took off my shoes and paddled around to cool off. I stayed for about an hour, then decided to keep going further down a small path I had seen coming out of the forest. I assumed it was an animal trail that kangaroos or wild pigs used to get to the creek. I loaded my backpack on and continued my adventure, going deeper into the forest, only stopping every now and then to tie a yellow ribbon on a branch. My reason for doing this was that, in the event I lost my bearings in this new area, I'd have markers to help me find my way back to the creek. The extra weight of the water in my backpack put pressure on my back muscles, so I stopped more frequently and rested. I still had the sense of being watched, but I pushed past my overactive imagination and decided to sing to myself as a distraction while I walked in a southwest direction. Eventually, I came to a clearing with rocks and mounds that indicated I was now approaching a location where caves ran underground. The location looked like a good place to camp, so I just needed to find a suitable cave to sleep in for the night. I was not keen on sharing a cave with animals or creepy crawlies, so I took off my backpack and walked around looking for cave entrances. There were a number of small openings and one larger cave that I could walk into without having to crawl. It was sandy and had a small rock pool for water that would make an ideal place for my camp. It smelled like wet dog, which was strange, and it had obviously been used in the past by an animal, as there were a number of bones scattered across one section of the cave. I looked for tracks to see what kind of animal it was, but there were none, so I did not worry and decided to go and get my backpack and settle in for the night. I went back to the clearing to find that my backpack had been broken into. My food packages, clothes, and camping gear had been pulled out and scattered across the ground. "Damn!" I yelled out, thinking it was wild pigs getting into my gear. I had obviously picked a location they frequented. I picked up my stuff and made my way back to the cave to settle down for the night and make a small fire. Fortunately, I still had most of my food, and there was an abundance of fresh water in the cave to make myself a hot drink and freshen up. I grabbed my phone out of my bag and decided to listen to some music while I relaxed and took in my environment. It was now dark outside, and the only light I had was from my fire and my headlamp. I had a backup torch in my backpack but didn't think I would need to use it, as I had no intention of wandering through the forest at night. Slowly, I began to drift off to sleep when I was abruptly awoken by 3 deep roars that I can only describe as sounding like a mix between a lion and an angry bull. Whatever it was must have had massive lungs, as the sound traveled and felt like it hit me in the chest, reverberating through me and out the other side. I experienced a feeling of dread that I cannot truly describe, primal within me. The hairs on my arms stood up like a wave of electricity had swept over me. My heart was pounding as I got to my feet and tried to focus on the exact location of the sound. I turned my headlamp on, grabbed my torch out of the backpack, and edged closer to the outside of the cave. I scanned around, looking to see what had bellowed at me. I heard the sound of rustling bush, swung the torch in that direction, and caught a glimpse of the light reflecting off some eyes. "What the hell?" I yelled. It was not a wild pig or a kangaroo. The eyes looked human, and whoever it was had to be at least 7 feet tall. My reaction stirred up a greater response, and now the trees were being shaken, and whatever it was began smashing everything around it in some kind of power display. I backed into the cave, grabbed my small tomahawk out of my bag, and crept back to the edge of the cave, hugging the wall. I peeked out, this time with my headlamp off, to see if I could locate it. Everything had gone silent except for the sound of my fire crackling. I crept out and once again scanned my torch light around the perimeter of the cave. There was no movement, so I walked slowly to where I had seen the trees shaking to see if there was any way to tell who or what had shaken the trees and roared at me. I shone the torch around the trees and was astounded to see trees broken not at the stump but at about the 6-foot height, snapped like twigs. Who or what had that kind of strength? I wondered as I made my way back to the cave entrance. There was a strong smell of wet dog lingering near the cave entrance. Maybe whoever it was had a dog with them and was choosing their time to attack me, I thought, so I positioned myself with the fire in front of me and kept watch for the rest of the night. When the light began to shine through the trees, I ventured out and took another look at where whoever it was had been watching me. My curiosity was up, and I didn't feel so frightened now, determined to get to the source of what happened the night before. I searched around the general area but could not find any traces and decided whoever it was had long gone and that there was no need to find another campsite. I went back to the cave, grabbed my fishing line, and walked along the creek until I got to an area that looked like it might have some fish. The next few hours were spent fishing, and fortunately, I managed to catch a couple of redfin for dinner. They have a lot of small bones but are sweet-tasting fish, and I was glad to have something fresh to eat. I went back to my campsite and made a small fire outside of the cave to cook the fish. I was hungry, and the smell of the fish made my stomach rumble. The day was beautiful, and apart from the scare of the night before, I was really enjoying this trip. Evening set in, and I prepared myself for my second night at my new campsite. The stars were out, and there was still not an ounce of wind, so it was perfect for star watching. I lay on my back staring up into the night sky when I heard what sounded like a rock dropping near me. I sat up, turned my headlamp on, and scanned the ground. There was a rock there that I had not noticed earlier. Another rock came out of the bush and hit me on the shoulder. Ouch! I yelled out, "Who the hell is throwing rocks?" As I got to my feet and looked in the direction the rock had come from. Again, I caught a glimpse of the reflective eyes, and this time I stepped forward, determined to call the person's bluff. It was obvious to me now it must have been a person to be able to throw rocks at me. I shouted out in an aggressive tone, "Stop it!" The person responded back with a deep throaty growl and roared back at me. The roar once again reverberated through me, sending me stumbling backward. I caught a glimpse of orange reddish-brown hair when I shone my torch toward the sound. A face appeared from behind the tree, and a human-like face stared back in my direction. Terror filled my mind as I took in the appearance of his face. He had a pronounced brow and large eyes that shone red in my torchlight. His nose was flat but not like an ape. It was more human-like and had flared nostrils. His head was giant, mouth was wide, and he grinned at me, showing large teeth. He appeared to be covered in reddish-brown hair of various lengths over his head and shoulders. He took a step forward as I stumbled back, trying to avoid my camp stove. By now, I could see he was massive, at least 8 feet tall and about 4 feet across. His skin was a dark, leathery gray color, and he seemed to have muscle upon muscle. I was no match for his strength and knew I didn't have a hope in hell of getting away from him. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was looking at. I had heard stories in Aboriginal legends about a creature called Yowie, also known around the world as Bigfoot, but I never believed in those stories. I always thought only nutjobs believed in fairy tales like that. Bigfoot growled again and began to walk forward toward me silently. I was astounded that such a large creature could move so silently and effortlessly. I backed into the cave as I knew it was pointless trying to run away in the dark. This creature could easily catch me, and there would be no chance of survival if he regarded me as prey. I waited for him to come closer, but for some reason, he didn't seem keen to walk past my campfire. Instead, he stopped, sniffed loudly at the remnants of my fish dinner, then looked once again at me. That gave me an idea. What if the creature simply wanted food and maybe I could use food as a peace offering? I kept my eyes on the creature as I fumbled around in my bag and pulled out a container of camped ham. I opened the container and stuck my hand out to offer it to him. The creature glared at me with such hatred in his eyes. I worried that I had offended him, so I threw the container near his feet. He was still watching me, bent down with his long arms, and picked the container up. I watched him stick his finger into the ham and then put it into his mouth. It was obviously to his liking, and he then proceeded to eat the rest. I thought to myself, maybe if I feed him all my food, he will see it as a peace offering and go away. I felt around again in my bag and pulled out an apple and a banana and threw them near his feet. He seemed to know what the apple was and immediately began to eat it, making me realize this creature had obviously accessed apple orchards in the region. I was still feeling hypervigilant but less scared now as he had not attempted yet to do me any harm. I bent down again, picked up my thermos, and poured some tea into my cup. He watched on, and I slowly stepped forward and put the cup on my small camp table. I gestured to him to take it, and once again he picked it up and tasted the sweet tea. He drank it down and dropped the cup onto the ground, turned around, and with a couple of steps disappeared back into the bush. The sounds of the cicadas started again, and I breathed a big sigh of relief. Bigfoot had gone and I was still alive. I didn't get much sleep that night because every little sound would snap me wide awake. I had decided to cut my camping trip short and head back to civilization as my sense of adventure had well and truly run out. As much as I was fascinated by Bigfoot, I was not keen to have another encounter, so as soon as it got light, I packed my gear and began to hike back to the creek. I reached the clearing near the creek around mid-morning and thought I would have a quick break before doing the final leg of my journey back to my vehicle. When I got to the creek, I took my shoes off and paddled in the creek to cool off as the mid-morning heat had set in, and I did not want to overheat in the last part of the journey. I found a good sitting spot next to the creek and ate my last sandwich, giving myself energy for the next leg of my journey. While sitting there, I began to notice once again the bush had gone silent. The cicadas stopped singing, and the birds had gone silent. It was eerily quiet, so I quickly put my shoes back on, packed my bag, and started to hike along the trail again. As I walked along, I became aware that there was movement in the bush that seemed to be pacing me. I turned my head to the left, hoping to get a glimpse of what was keeping up with my pace. When I slowed, it slowed. When I sped up, it sped up. I began to connect the dots and realized that perhaps Bigfoot was tracking me. So I began to jog, hoping to put some distance between myself and the creature. The sound of heaving footsteps kept up with me, so I tried to run faster and faster until I could not keep the pace up. I eventually ran out of breath and had to stop momentarily to catch it, which was a bad mistake. Out of the bush came this huge Bigfoot, not the same as the one I had encountered the night before. This one was around the same size but dark brown and extremely agitated. It was blocking my path, making it impossible for me to get past. So I stood there trying to catch my breath while I figured out my next move. The creature began growling and making threatening gestures at me. I slowly knelt down, never taking my eyes off it, and undid my backpack as I needed a distraction and hoped it would go for my backpack before trying to attack me. It was also my only chance of getting away if possible. The creature picked up tree branches and smashed them around, rushing back and forth on the path in front of me. I watched as it did this and put my backpack in front to use it as a form of protection against the branches it was throwing in my direction. The creature moved slowly toward me while its eyes glared with such hatred and disgust that I just knew it intended to kill me. I knew this was the end for me, so I closed my eyes and braced while I heard the heavy steps rushing toward me. Bigfoot lifted me off the ground like a rag doll with its large hand gripped around my neck. My body went limp, my mind froze in fear, and I kept my eyes closed as I did not want my last memory to be of the beast's hideous mouth. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I prepared to die. Then suddenly it dropped me back down onto the ground. I opened my eyes and looked up at the massive creature and heard another loud roar coming from behind me. Oh no, I desperately thought another one was coming. I got to my knees and tried to crawl away from the creature, but it reached down and grabbed my arm. The other Bigfoot charged toward us, and to my surprise, it hit my attacker hard in the shoulder, causing it to let me go. The Bigfoots wrestled through the bush as they fought each other in a savage and brutish battle. I got to my feet and suddenly realized that the other Bigfoot was the one from my campsite the night before and that, for some reason, it had saved me. I watched momentarily as the two huge creatures crashed through the bush, beating each other with heavy fists and powerful kicks. My adrenaline kicked in, and I grabbed my backpack and ran for my life, never stopping to look back. The sounds of the Bigfoot roars and fighting were left behind. I finally saw my car in the parking lot and, without slowing, pulled my backpack off and kept running for the car as fast as I could. I could still hear the sounds of trees breaking and the occasional whoop, but nothing more as I fumbled for my car keys. My hands were shaking so hard as I struggled to open my car door and get in. I started the engine and spun the car out of the gravel parking lot, narrowly missing the signpost, and sped down the gravel road, not caring how much the car slipped and fishtailed. I just had to get out of there. I hit the main road and drove at high speed until I got close to the town, only then slowing to a reasonable speed. When I finally arrived home, I examined myself for injuries, and fortunately, apart from bruising around my neck and arms and scratches, I was okay. Well, as you can probably guess, I have never gone hiking or camping in the bush again, no matter what. It's been 5 years now, and I still cannot talk about this incident without shaking and feeling overwhelmed. It's the first time I have told my story to anyone, and I know that many would not believe me, but I swear to you it happened, and Bigfoots, whatever you want to call them, are real.